We've all heard that we should be more self-assured. From classrooms to boardrooms, interviews, stages, relationships, and negotiations, the message remains consistent. Just believe in yourself. As if it's as simple as flipping a switch. But here's a question for you. Why does self-assurance matter? Not how do we achieve it, not what it looks like, but why? Many view self-assurance as something superficial, a louder voice, a firmer handshake, eye contact, motivational quotes on the mirror. But that's not self-assurance, that's an act. And you and I both know that what's rehearsed can be repeated, but it can't be trusted. True self-assurance doesn't start with posture, it starts with purpose. Real self-assurance isn't the result of pretending to know everything, it's the outcome of knowing why you're doing anything. I once met a young entrepreneur, a brilliant guy with a great idea. He came to me after a pitch meeting that had completely fallen apart. He was shaken. I asked him what happened. He said they didn't buy it. They kept questioning everything, and halfway through, I started doubting it myself. I asked him one question, why do you believe in this idea? And he paused. And then he said, because I think it could work. I told him that's not a reason to believe, that's a reason to hope. You see, self-assurance based on outcome is fragile. It shatters the moment things don't go your way. But self-assurance based on belief in something bigger than the moment, bigger than yourself, that kind of self-assurance is unshakable. That's the kind that endures. Think about the people we admire the most, the leaders we trust, the ones who walk into a room and don't need to see a room before we feel their presence. It's not their suits, their resumes, or their charisma. It's the clarity of their conviction. They know what they stand for. And because they know, we feel safe standing with them. That's why self-assurance matters, because it's not really about you. It's about how your clarity creates courage in others. It's about trust. It's about service. And I'll tell you something else. The people who have the most authentic self-assurance, they're not always the loudest. They're not the ones posting the most or talking the most or showing off the most. No, usually they're the quiet ones. The ones whose actions speak for them. The ones who don't need to prove anything because their purpose already is something. I remember sitting down with a combat veteran a few years ago. He told me that the bravest soldiers he served with were rarely the ones with the most muscle. It was the ones who had the most clarity. They knew exactly why they were there. They weren't fearless, they were faithful. Faithful to something beyond themselves, to their team, their mission, their cause. And that's what self-assurance is. Not fearlessness, faithfulness. There's a story I love about a young teacher who was terrified on her first day of school. Brand new inner city classroom, she was told these kids were tough, that they wouldn't respect her, that she should be ready for a fight. She walked into that classroom with shaking hands, when instead of trying to assert her authority or win them over with rules and warnings, she did something unexpected. She wrote one question on the board. Why are we here? The kids didn't answer right away, but then slowly started talking. And it wasn't about grades or exams. It was about their lives, their dreams. One kid said, to prove people wrong. Another said, to survive. Another said, to find out if I matter. The room changed, and so did she. That teacher told me later that she was still nervous every morning, but the fear didn't control her anymore because now she had a reason, a real one. Not to be liked, not to impress the principal, but to create a space where these kids remembered their own why. She brought herself assurance, not in her credentials, but in her cause. So let me ask you, when you walk into a room, when you speak up in a meeting, when you make a decision, when you risk something, what are you standing on? Is it your title, your appearance, your track record? Or is it something that cannot be taken from you? We think self-assurance is about having the right answer. It's not. Self-assurance is about asking the right question and being brave enough to stand in that question until your life begins to answer it for you. The question is always why. Not why in theory, not a mission statement framed on a wall, but the kind of why that makes you cry when you say it out loud. The kind of why that gets you out of bed when everything else says stay under the covers. The kind of why that keeps you humble when things go right and keeps you grounded when things fall apart. I've met executives who command attention, but have no self-assurance. And I've met janitors who walk with the dignity of kings. The difference isn't talent. It isn't status. It's whether or not they've decided to live for something that matters. Self-assurance is not the voice that says, "Look at me." It's the presence that says, "I see you." It's not bravado. It's belief. It's not noise. It's knowing. And the only way you get that knowing, the only way you create the kind of self-assurance that doesn't crack under pressure, is to begin with one honest, sometimes difficult, but always essential question. Why are you here? Start there. Start with why. We have this myth that self-assurance is something people are born with, that some people just have it, like it's coded into their DNA. You've heard it, right? She's just naturally self-assured. He was always like that. But let me ask you something. If self-assurance is a trait, fixed and inherited, why does it disappear when life falls apart? Why does it crack under pressure? Why does someone who was once self-assured suddenly question everything? That's because self-assurance is not a trait. It's not permanent. It's not given. Self-assurance is a practice. It's built, not born. And more importantly, it's built daily. Think of it like this. Nobody walks into a gym for the first time and lifts 300 pounds. Strength doesn't work that way. It takes reps, struggle, discipline. You don't gain self-assurance by waiting for the moment when you feel ready. You gain self-assurance by moving even when you're not, by taking the step before you know where it's leading. I once spoke to a woman who had just finished her first marathon. She was 52, she wasn't an athlete. She had never run more than a mile in her life. And I asked her, "When did you start feeling like a runner?" And she said, "The first time I ran in the rain." I laughed a little and asked her what she meant. She said, "Anyone can run when it's sunny and perfect, but that day it was pouring. Everything in me said, stay inside, but I ran anyway. That's when I knew I wasn't just doing this, I was this." That's practice. Self-assurance comes from the moments when you move forward even when it's uncomfortable, when you show up even when it's inconvenient, when you speak even when your voice shakes. It's not the absence of doubt, it's the decision to act in the presence of it. I remember a leader who told me that the turning point in his career didn't come when he landed the promotion or when the numbers finally went up. It came when he told his team, "I don't have all the answers." For years, he believed his job was to have it all figured out. But what he learned, and what changed everything, was that his people didn't need perfection. They needed presence. And when he stopped pretending, they started trusting. That's when self-assurance showed up. You see, we confuse perfection with power. We confuse performance with presence. But self-assurance isn't a show. It's a signal. It signals to the people around you, "I'm here. I'm honest. I'm trying." That's powerful because it invites others to do the same. And that's why self-assurance is something we practice. Not because we'll ever do it perfectly, but because every time we practice, we grow. Every time we lean into the discomfort, we build a kind of inner muscle. Every time we honor a word to ourselves, whether it's waking up when we said we would, making the call we were afraid to make, or finishing the thing we wanted to quit, we are wiring trust. And self-assurance is at its core a form of self-trust. That's the part we forget. Self-assurance doesn't begin when people believe in you. It begins when you believe you'll show up for yourself no matter what. There's a reason athletes train in all conditions, not just when the weather is good, not just when the cameras are on. Because if you only perform when the circumstances are perfect, you'll never be ready when it counts. Self-assurance works the same way. It's not what you do when people are watching. It's who you are when no one is. And yet most people wait. They wait for the right moment, the right mindset,
the right level of clarity, the right version of themselves. But here's the truth. Self-assurance doesn't come before the leap. It comes because of it. There's a story I'll never forget about a young woman who was terrified of public speaking. Her hands would shake, her stomach would twist, her voice would go dry. But she knew she had a message to share. So she made a deal with herself. She would give one short talk every week for a year, no matter how small the audience, no matter how much she stumbled. And she did. The first one was awkward. The fifth wasn't much better. But by week 20, something changed.
She told me, I stopped performing and I started connecting. She didn't wait for self-assurance to appear, she practiced it into existence. And that's the message I want you to hear. Self-assurance is not an achievement, it's a habit, a daily one. It's not about how loud you are, it's about how consistently you keep showing up. Self-assurance is built when you do hard things without needing to be the best, when you speak the truth without needing applause, when you take responsibility even when it would be easier to run. That's what makes it unstoppable. Because when self-assurance is a trait, you're always afraid to lose it. But when it's a practice, you know how to rebuild it. So if you're waiting for the nerves to disappear, for the path to be clear, for the voice inside to sound stronger, I want you to stop. I want you to start. Start wherever you are. Say the thing, raise your hand, apply, apologize, try again. You don't need to feel brave to act brave. You just need to act and then do it again and again. That's how it works. One step, one rep, one moment of discomfort at a time. Self-assurance isn't given to the chosen few. It's practiced by the persistent many. So go practice. Everywhere you look, someone is offering a list. 5 steps to boost your self-assurance. 10 hacks to overcome fear. 3 rules for self-belief. And don't get me wrong, steps have their place. But steps without story don't stick. If self-assurance was just about instructions, we'd all be walking around with unshakable self-belief. We've had the tips, we've read the books, we've seen the motivational posts. So why isn't it enough? Because we don't change when we're told what to do. We change when we're reminded of who we are. You want someone to believe in themselves, don't tell them what to do. Show them who they've been. Remind them of the moment they stood up when it was hard. Remind them of the time they said yes, even while afraid. Tell them a story that sounds like their story, and suddenly something clicks. Not because you gave them a map, but because you gave them a mirror. We're wired for narrative. Our brains, our hearts, they lean in when a story begins. We listen differently, we remember differently. Most of all, we feel differently. And self-assurance doesn't grow through logic, it grows through meaning. Meaning comes from experience. Experience becomes unforgettable when it's shared through story. I once sat with a young manager who told me he was struggling to lead. He said his team didn't respect them, that he felt small in every meeting, that no matter how many articles he read or advice he took, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. So I asked him, "Tell me about a time when you felt proud to be part of something." He paused. Then he said, "My first job was in a coffee shop. I was just a barista, but the manager treated us like owners. Every decision he made, he explained it to us. When someone made a mistake, he coached, not scolded. We were kids, but we felt like a team." And right there in that moment, he remembered, not the tactics of leadership, the feeling of leadership, the way it changed him. I said, "You already know how to lead. You just forgot the story." That's what stories do. They don't teach us new things. They reconnect us to what we already know, but stopped trusting. And this is why the most powerful way to teach self-assurance is not to stand on a stage and list off principles. It's to be honest, to be human, to tell the truth about the times you didn't feel self-assured, the times you failed, the times you doubted. Because when people hear perfection, they compare. But when they hear struggle, they relate.
I've shared stages with executives who've had decades of success under their belt. And you know what moment always lands with the audience? Not the big win, not the title, not the polished advice. It's the one story where they admit, I thought I blew it. I almost walked away. I was scared out of my mind. Because we don't learn from someone's shine. We learn from their scars. We don't follow people who appear invincible. We follow people who are real. There's a woman I met who coaches high school debate. She told me her #1 rule:
No student is allowed to give a speech without telling at least one personal story. I asked her why. She said, because data informs, but story persuades, and self-assurance is the art of persuasion, starting with yourself. She's right. Self-assurance isn't built by memorizing phrases. It's built by owning your experience. When you tell your story and you tell it honestly, you remind yourself, I've been through things, I've grown, I've faced fire and kept walking. You build self-assurance not from the facts of your life, but from the meaning you make from those facts. And here's what makes this even more important. When you tell your story, you give someone else permission to tell theirs. That's leadership. That's connection. That's how cultures change, not through slogans, but through shared humanity. There's a young man I'll never forget. He had a stutter and public speaking terrified him, but he had a message. So he stood in front of his class and told the story of the first time he ordered food by himself. How it took him 30 seconds to say 3 words. How people laughed. How he went home and didn't speak for 2 days. But then, the next week, he tried again and again until one day the cashier didn't look away. He smiled. He said, that's when I realized I don't need to be perfect to be heard. You could hear a pin drop in that room, not because he had crafted the perfect speech, but because he let them into his truth. That's the key. When we try to teach self-assurance, we often do it from the outside in. Change your posture, change your tone, change your clothes. But when we tell our stories and invite others to tell theirs, we build self-assurance from the inside out. You want to empower someone? Don't give them a script, give them a stage. Let them speak their experience. Let them find strength in the very things they thought disqualified them. Self-assurance doesn't grow in isolation. It grows in community, in connection, in storytelling. So the next time you want to teach self-assurance to your child, to your team, to yourself, don't start with steps. Start with story. Your story, the one you think isn't impressive enough, the one that still makes your voice catch because that's the story that someone else needs to hear. Self-assurance is not about sounding like someone else. It's about standing in your own truth. Loud or quiet, messy or polished, as long as it's real. So tell the truth. Tell the story. Tell it again. And watch self-assurance take root not just in you, but in everyone who hears it. We live in a world obsessed with answers. We idolize certainty. We admire people who know what they're doing. And so when someone struggles with self-assurance, our instinct is to rush in with advice, to solve their discomfort with instruction, to fix their fear by telling them exactly what to do. But here's the thing. Self-assurance doesn't grow when someone gives you answers. Self-assurance grows when someone asks you a question that makes you think, because instruction tells you what they know. But a question invites you to discover what you believe. I once met a young man who had just taken a job leading a team twice his age. Smart guy, great potential. But after 3 months, he was burning out. He told me he felt like an imposter every day, that he kept trying to prove himself to have all the answers. I asked him, why do you feel like you need to be the smartest person in the room? He looked at me confused at first, then he said, because if I'm not, they won't respect me. I said, what makes you think respect is based on knowing everything? He paused. Because that's how I was trained. That's how I saw my last manager act. I didn't give him advice. I didn't correct him. I just kept asking. And as we talked, he realized the real source of his anxiety wasn't the job. It was the belief that he wasn't allowed to be curious, only certain.
That's what questions do. They don't change your circumstances, they change the way you see yourself inside them. Self-assurance isn't about having fewer questions, it's about being less afraid of them. I remember hearing about a teacher who started every semester with one phrase written on the board. What do you wonder about? Not what do you know, not what are your goals, but wonder. And she said it changed the way her students showed up. They weren't there to be filled with information, they were there to explore, to investigate, to connect the dots between their lives and the world around them. That space where curiosity replaces performance, that's where self-assurance starts to breathe. Because when someone asks you a real question, not one designed to test you, but one that invites your voice, it tells you that your perspective matters, that your thoughts have weight, that your experiences mean something. And that's the foundation of self-assurance, the belief that your view of the world is valid. We've all had those moments when someone we admire asked us a thoughtful question, and not just to be polite, but because they genuinely wanted to hear what we thought. Do you remember how that felt? It didn't just make you feel seen, it made you stand a little taller, speak a little more clearly. It reminded you that you have.
We move from imitation to integration, from doubt to direction, from noise to knowing. I met a woman once who was known for coaching some of the most remarkable young leaders in her city. I asked her what her secret was. She said, "I don't give them self-assurance. I help them uncover it. It's already in there, buried under years of needing to please, perform, and perfect. I just ask questions that help them remember who they were before they got scared." What a gift that is. And maybe that's the most powerful truth of all. Self-assurance isn't something we teach to people. It's something we draw out of them with curiosity, with respect, with the kind of presence that says, "I don't need you to impress me. I want you to know yourself." So the next time someone tells you they're struggling to feel self-assured, don't rush to solve it. Ask something real, something human, something that invites them to go deeper, not wider. Because the goal is not to sound more certain. The goal is to become more grounded. And questions are how we get there. But we've all heard the phrase lead by example, but I think we sometimes forget what that actually means, especially when it comes to self-assurance. Because self-assurance, real self-assurance, is not something you can hand someone. It's not something you can explain your way into, and it's definitely not something you can fake and hope others won't notice. Self-assurance is modeled, it's observed, it's felt, it's absorbed by the people around us. Not because we say we're self-assured, but because we act in a way that's rooted, grounded, and consistent, even when it's hard. I'll never forget a moment I witnessed years ago at a small leadership workshop. There was a senior executive in the room, a woman who had climbed the ladder in a male-dominated industry, someone people naturally looked up to. Midway through the session, a junior employee asked her, "Were you always self-assured?" The room went still. She could have said yes. She could have listed her credentials or her accomplishments. Instead, she paused, then said, "Absolutely not. In fact, I still have days where I doubt myself. But I've learned that self-assurance doesn't mean I'm always sure. It means I show up even when I'm not." That moment changed the temperature of the room. You could feel the shift because suddenly everyone realized self-assurance isn't about projecting invincibility. It's about modeling honesty, courage, steadiness. What that woman modeled in that moment was more powerful than any definition or framework. She didn't teach self-assurance, she demonstrated it. And this is something we need to understand, especially those of us in positions of influence, whether we're parents, leaders, teachers, or teammates. People don't follow what you say nearly as much as they absorb who you are. Think about a child learning to swim. You can tell them not to be afraid, you can explain how floating works, you can even promise them they'll be okay. But the moment they really believe it, that's when they see you get into the water calmly. That's when they watch you float. When they see you breathe, not panic. You're showing them this space is safe. And if it's safe for you, maybe, just maybe, it's safe for them too. That's what modeling does. It creates a kind of emotional permission.
The truth is, we're modeling all the time, whether we mean to or not. We model how to handle pressure, how to recover from mistakes, how to receive feedback, and most importantly, we model how to talk to ourselves. Because people don't just listen to our words, they listen to the tone underneath them. I once worked with a manager who had a reputation for being self-assured and calm under stress. When I asked him about it, he laughed. He said, "It's not that I don't feel pressure, I just don't want my team to absorb my panic." So I asked, "What do you do when everything's falling apart behind the scenes?" He said, "I slow down. I speak softer. I ask more questions. Because if I model steadiness, they'll start to mirror it." That's leadership. That's self-assurance in action. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When we say all the right things but behave in contradiction, people believe the behavior. You can tell your team that mistakes are okay, but if you react with blame or frustration when one happens, you've taught them the opposite. You can tell your children they're worthy, but if they watch you constantly criticize yourself in the mirror, they'll learn that self-assurance is conditional. So if we want to build self-assurance in the people around us, we have to become conscious of what we're modeling. Do we own our imperfections? Do we apologize when we get it wrong? Do we admit when we're scared and keep going anyway? Self-assurance is not loud, it's not showy, it's not bulletproof. It's steady, it's rooted, it's visible in how we carry ourselves when things don't go to plan, in how we treat others when no one's watching, in whether we're willing to be seen fully, not just in our strength, but in our struggles too. Years ago, I watched the CEO walk into an all-hands meeting and open by saying, "Before we start, I need to share something personal. I've been struggling with anxiety, and I've realized I've been avoiding hard conversations. That ends today." The room didn't collapse.